radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening, Fade to Black. How you doing? How you doing? Making sure my desk is straightened out. You know, it's what I do. This is Fade to Black. Today is Wednesday, December 11th, 2024. Let's do this, man. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. And what an amazing week this week on Fade to Black. And I'm just going to say this. When you have the ability to do what I do on this show, which is engage, question, seek knowledge, answers, do all of those things. This week has been all of that for me. And if you think about it, and, you know, I always say it's always an amazing week here on Fade to Black, but looking back, you know, Monday, Dragon Arnold was with us from Skinwalker Ranch, an amazing show. Last night, Jay Widener was here talking about his new film, A Clockwork Shining. Tonight, I get to dive into ancient mysteries. Tomorrow night, James Fox is here. He's got the premiere of his new film, The Program, on the 16th. He's going to be with us tomorrow night. That's why I do this show. You are here to learn. If I learn, you learn right along with me. And you guys are used to that. You can see the ebb and flow of the conversation, and you can see what's going on, and you pretty much know by now what question is coming next because you're inside of my head. And that's what this show is about. Tonight, ancient mysteries. And the subjects tonight are going to cover everything that I like to talk about on the show and all the countries that I like to go and visit and everything else. We're going to be doing that tonight. I want to remind everybody I've got 4 major events coming up. I have 8, but these are the next 4. The Conscious Life Expo at the LAX Hilton. I am hosting that event. That is February 7th through the 10th, 2025, right here in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Hilton. The links for that are below. After that, it is Rise of the Guardians, March 29th and 30th, 2025 in Sedona, Arizona. I'm hosting and presenting there as well. And then I'm heading to the Midwest for the Contact Modalities Expo. That is May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, 2025 in Delavan, Wisconsin at Delavan Lake. All right. And I'm hosting and presenting that too as well. And then I'm going to Peru again this year, but I'm going twice next year in 2025. And my first Peru trip is for the Inca Celebration of the Sun. This is with Brian Forrester. And it's June 17th through the 27th, 2025. And if you want a paradigm-shifting, life-changing event, this is the one. All right? So come and hang out with us. HiddenIncaTours.com. All of the links for all of my events are below. All right? And I think that's about it. Let's just jump straight into it. Tonight, Petros Koutoupis is with us. Ancient Mysteries tonight. And we are going to explore ancient history, mythology, and he's an author, he's a researcher, and it's all about connecting the dots. And we're going to be doing all of that tonight. We might even jump into some ancient languages and his studies with that, and the connections between mythology and historical events. All of that and much more. Petros's complete bio is in the link below over on our website and throughout social media. And I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Petros Koutoupis. Petros, good evening, young man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
It's cold out here. You got snow?
We got a little bit earlier today. I mean, this is Chicago, so the weather is all over the place. It can be negative 20 in the morning and 70 degrees in the afternoon, right? And then you're back to freezing again. So it's been all over the place. And I know later this week with the wind chill, we're going to actually be negative 20. So it's
Yeah,
it's
that
cold.
that sounds about right. You know, when I was a kid, we were talking earlier, that's where I grew up, and I remember, this is what I remember. And just thinking about it now, I think it's child abuse, okay? Honestly. But when I was a kid, if it was 0 degrees, it was warm enough to walk to school.
Yes.
You know what I mean? It was like, you know, and think about that. You know,
Yeah.
I want it to be 0. You know, I just want it to be 0. Zero's balmy. And it's wild. You know, and there was another, I want to ask you about this. I remember as a kid. Now I don't know if this is some planted memory in my head that but anyway, I remember going down to Lake Michigan in the winter and seeing icebergs. You ever see icebergs in Lake Michigan?
Icebergs in Lake Michigan. You know what? No. And the thing is, you know, right now I live in the Chicago suburbs. I have done so pretty much most of my entire life, but I used to work in Chicago every day, you know, for many years. And I'm
Right.
thinking about Lake Michigan because I used to see it
Yes.
nearly every day, and I don't remember seeing icebergs. No.
Yeah, see, you know, it just might be something with my childhood. I don't know. Some planted memory. But Chicago is a strange mix of things before we jump into the show. And also we have to get the first time guest disclaimer in. Chicago is blazingly hot and humid in the summer and
Yeah.
freezing cold in the winter. It's so hot in the summer, it's unbearable.
Yeah.
And then winter rolls around and you're like, summer wasn't that bad. Well, no, summer was that bad. But it's just that it's that cold, right? It's weird, man. Chicago is just a bizarre mix of both. Okay, before we start the show, you get the first time guest disclaimer, Petros, which is this. Petros, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends. But we're going to end as friends. Now, you have to accept so we can move on.
Yes, I accept.
Oh,
But, you know, in order for this to work out as friends, you know, I need beer.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Do you have one?
Not at the moment. No.
Okay. All right. I'll go break one out during the break, and we'll do that. I wanted to actually start out here because of the wide range of locations and timelines that we're going to be jumping into tonight. I know sort of where my fascination started with all of this. Do you have one location or one culture that you're attracted to the most, or maybe that got you started into this, or was it something else?
You know, that's a very difficult question for me to answer.
Mine changes, by
the
the way.
thing
Mine
is,
changes. Mine changes.
mine has changed over time. I would historically jump from one culture to another. When I was younger, it was Egypt that really got me interested in history. But I think that's with a lot of people. A lot of people that are interested in history, archaeology, mythology. Egypt has this appeal, this attraction, this glamour, right? That it's mysterious. There's just so much we know, and yet a lot more that we don't know. And we're still sifting through the sands and digging up mummies and trying to piece the puzzle together. And it just lures people in. But as I grew older, I started to look into other cultures. I got interested in ancient Greece. And well, if you can tell by my name, I'm Greek. And you know, it felt right. So I dove deep into Greek history and Minoan history and so forth. And then over time, I moved further east towards Mesopotamia. I loved Mesopotamian history with the Sumerians, the Akkadians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. But then something about the Bible. The Bible just pulled me in. And it's not so much the religious aspect of the Bible, it's the history around the Bible in the Holy Land that appealed to me, especially the Old Testament era. The Old Testament era, where there was just so much going on. And I don't know, I hopped from one place to another. And part of that is a result of my ADHD. But
Sure.
the other part of it is my autism. I'm autistic, and when I build an interest around something, I tend to hyper focus, and I dive deep into that topic, that subject, and learn as much as I can, absorb as much as I can, and then, when I feel like I've learned enough, I find something else to hyper focus on. It's not that I feel that I've learned everything, but I feel like, okay, I know enough about this culture. Let me learn about the next. And then, because I know so much about all these other cultures, I start connecting the dots. How was this culture related to that culture? What influences impacted this next culture, and so forth. So I started to weave together all these separate topics, subjects, and started to build an even bigger picture. And it just, like I said, it's difficult to answer, but
no, I think that's an honest answer, and I think that a lot of this, for the same natural reasons, right? It's like, Egypt is an amazing gateway drug. It just is. It just is. And for me, I grew up in Chicago. And so you had creature features, you had all those black and white, mummy movies, on Friday nights. And, and you're 5 years, how can you not be influenced by that, and looking at some ancient sarcophagus open up and, what's that all about? And the allure of pharaohs and curses in Egypt. Well, you kind of just jump into that. And then you go and take a look at Egypt, and then start connecting the dots and folding out from there. So no, I think that's an honest answer. Egypt is just a gateway drug, man, for people that do what we do.
It also helps that we have the Field Museum downtown that
the best
has an Egyptian exhibit. But I don't know if you're aware of this. South of the Field. On the campus of the University of Chicago, there's the Oriental Institute. Now they call it the ISAC. I forget what the ISAC stands for. ISAC. But anyway, it was formerly known as the Oriental Institute of the University of Chicago, and it is a museum that is open to the public, free of charge. Although they do suggest you donate money when you show up, as most museums do. But the University of Chicago has a wonderful archaeology program, and they focus on Near Eastern archaeology
and Mesopotamia.
And yes. So they cover Egypt, they cover Turkey, or Anatolia, I should say. They cover the entire Levantine region, so Canaan and so forth, and then further east, the Mesopotamian region, and even more east in the, I'm sure they've had digs. I can't remember off top. Yeah, they did in the Iranian region, because they have a huge Persian exhibit as well. So when you go
they do. It's amazing.
It is. It's a beautiful collection.
It's a beautiful. They focus. Okay, back in the 90s. Okay. Yes, you asked me if I'm aware. I'm going to say, yes, I am aware. And now I'm going to turn this back on you and say, are you aware? Back in the 90s, the University of Chicago, on the internet, now this is revolutionary for 1995, 1996, when this started. They had an automated translation for the Sumerian text. And you could input your words in English, and it would go and locate it, if it was there, on the tablets and then do the direct translation for you. This was 1995, 1996. So I'm reading Sitchin, right? I'm following all this crazy stuff, and I'm jumping down that rabbit hole that's bottomless, as you well know. And I'm reading Sitchin and then turning around and jumping on the University of Chicago website and translating the Sumerian text. And that really opened up my eyes on a lot of things. But that's how forward thinking the University of Chicago is. And that's how extensive their collection is.
Yeah, a lot of in time, a lot of universities have done something similar, but the University of Chicago also has the most complete Akkadian dictionary. I don't know if you can access those words online today, but if you go there in person, you can see it in their library, and it's so many volumes. I don't even know how many, but in like dozens and dozens of volumes.
Well, okay.
Build this dictionary, but yes.
Since we're there, we're on two different locations, and I have suggested over the years that although we have modern boundary lines and country, borders that are there, when you go back 5,000-10,000 years, it was a different situation. Number one, but number two, that these cultures overlapped a lot.
Yes.
Göbekli Tepe is not. I'm not saying you would walk it, but you could walk from Giza to Göbekli Tepe. It might take you a while, but you could also do the same thing and head into modern day Iraq. It's not that far. In fact, they turned around and invaded each other quite a bit. So, but my question is this is where I want to start out. The ages of things, especially when you personally go to these sites and see them for yourselves, something doesn't seem quite right to me. And I think that the dating and the aging of a lot of these sites is much older than what academia wants to teach us. And I think that we're finding out more and more as time goes by that this is indeed the case. What do you make of that when you look at the ancient cultures of not only ancient Sumer, Mesopotamia, but Egypt? Do you think that they go much farther back than what is taught?
The idea of chronology and how these nations separately are, chronologically pieced together is it's a very difficult subject. It's a very difficult task. It's just part of the challenge is finding. So let's say, for example, you dig up an artifact or you see a monument. Part of the challenge is trying to find that object within its historical context, right? So you try to say, okay, within this layer, because a lot of archaeological sites, there are settlement layers. And as the newest being on top, and as you dig deeper, you get into older layers and you find, let's say an object in a specific layer. You need to find something within that context, within that layer, to place it within a certain time frame. So let's say you find a piece of writing that talks about a specific pharaoh, let's say in Egypt. Okay, so now we have an item. We have a pharaoh that it ties to. But when did this pharaoh rule? Now we need to find something that that lines up with that pharaoh's ruling. Okay, so in this other piece of text, maybe found in Egypt at another location, or maybe found in a Hittite, in the Hittite capital of Hattusis in Turkey, we find the name of the pharaoh or some sort of correspondence between that pharaoh and a Hittite monarch. Okay, so now we're able to align this pharaoh, these two kings, together across two different nations. And you have to and then you say, okay, now we have a king's list, and we have a king's list that goes, within these certain time frames. We know how long these kings ruled, and we're starting to piece all these together with all these separate rulers that at some point interacted with these other rulers, and you're trying to move backwards in time, right? There's other sciences involved now, a lot of lab work with carbon dating and things that I'm not aware of. But at the end of the day, when you take all this and piece it together, it builds a much clearer picture. Now, do I believe that there is the possibility of the accepted chronology being wrong and things possibly being older? Yes, it is possible, because a lot of the ancient lists, the texts that we rely on, can we take them at face value? Maybe not. Like these kings lists that we find throughout
Well,
Egypt.
yeah, the Sumerian kings list, that thing, it goes back 400,000 years if you take it at face value.
Exactly. And it's similar with the Egyptian ones.
Sure.
Like the ones from the New Kingdom period. They're talking about kings that ruled in the Middle Kingdom and kings that ruled in the in the Old Kingdom, and they have the lengths of their reign and so forth. Well, how accurate is that? I don't know.
Okay, so let's stay right here. I like where you're going with this, because, and just like the Bible, it's the same thing with the Bible, where you've got the ages of people, being 700 years and 800 years old. It was the same thing with the Sumerian kings list, right? And we have the typical dating of modern history at 3000 BC, whether it's Giza or it's Mesopotamia, right? Ancient Sumer. 3000 BC, nothing to see here before then. Right now, everything is 3000 BC. And then you turn around and you look at the Bible. If you take it literally, obviously it's pushing things back. You look at the Sumerian kings list, it's pushing things back. And then you go to the builder's text in Edfu, and which I have been right there and I have looked at it. I haven't translated it because I don't read it, or I don't read most of it. But it's pushing the origins back for 10,000 years before the writing of the text. Not 10,000 years before now, 10,000 years before that text was written, right? And the origins of Egypt. So everything is indeed pushed way, way back. It's just how do we, and how did they, how did they come up with their years? How do they come up with their dating? What is it that constitutes a year to these ancient cultures? And for them to say 10,000 years, how do we know that that's 10,000 years and not 500 years? Or is it 150,000 years? Well, we really don't know unless we can tie in celestial events into the calendar and some of the things that they may have mentioned, solar eclipses, and you know what I mean? Comets are a good dating source as well. But I think that we are looking at that as pushing things back much further than this 3000 BC timeline that we currently sit in.
Well, before we get into that, it may interest the listeners to know that even modern day academics still argue about chronologies, and there's different datings for different cultures that are constantly being suggested and argued about, and you see rebuttals and rebuttals for rebuttals and so forth. So it's not that everyone else except for academia is challenging the chronology, even academia itself. Now, let's be blunt here. They're not challenging the fact that the start of the Sumerians goes back 10,000 years. The chronologies they're arguing are usually off by maybe 50 years or 100 years, nothing super extreme. But chronology is something that continues to be challenged even in the academic world. So when I myself say, okay, yes, things could be older. I don't necessarily believe that they're 10,000 years older. And I'll get to why maybe the early writers did that right afterward. But I believe that maybe there is room for adjustment, especially when it comes to the biblical text. That, especially when it relates to the David, Solomon, the United Monarchy, and what follows after the the divide between Israel and Judah. But with regards to the early writers, be it Mesopotamian, be it Egyptian, or any other culture that had these early lists, part of the challenge is before writing, a lot of this was passed down through oral tradition.
Mhm.
And as you started to bring up, through this oral tradition, a lot of these kings, events that could have been real, could have been mythological or fictitious, made up, for this, whoever was commissioning this list, maybe they wanted to be aligned or tied to something greater. I think of Aeneas, during the reign of Caesar Augustus, right? With
Mhm.
the start of the Roman Empire, he wanted to be tied to something greater. So he told Virgil, "Hey, I need you to write an epic for me. I want to be tied to this hero from the Trojan War," and there you go. But with these older writers, you have these oral traditions that come down, and how long these oral traditions were passed from generation to generation, I mean, we'll never know, because writing, the earliest forms of writing, although it is being debated, started with the Sumerians and the Egyptians in, separately, but roughly around the same time frame. And, they were tied to significant events, like you said, celestial events. This comet or this eclipse or something. But as to why they had these long lives, 10,000 years, or in the biblical writings, hundreds of years, and so forth, I think it just made it a better story. It made it an era that was that much greater, that much more wonderful, something that, like, sort of like a golden age. If you think about Homer telling the story around the Trojan War, this was an age of heroes. This was a golden era. This was when people went around on these adventures, living, these great lives, these longer lives, and doing these wonderful things. Well, the kings of, the Mesopotamia did the same thing, right?
Well, except, okay, this is where I say except, and you're
Okay.
right. Except Homer turned out to be true. Right?
Well,
you
well,
know what I mean? I just recently completed a pretty extensive documentary that was just released, chasing down all of the locations, right, in the Odyssey. They're all there, right? And some of the things that we just thought were, fiction and made up, and no, they're all there. And that, forget about Troy. That's too easy. That's low hanging fruit at this point, right? But they're all there, and yeah, it's a great work, and it's the hero's journey, and it's all of that. But it was all based on real places and real locations. Okay, so let me bring this up. This is where science and the Sumerian culture, including like the Epic of Gilgamesh, clash head on. And that is this: anthropologists and historians will say Homo sapien sapien, you and I are 200,000 years old. All right? Okay. That we just appeared here. We're still looking for the missing link, but you and I, us, this version of us, pop, 200,000 years ago, we just came out of nowhere. Right? Okay. Not looking like anything else. I like to say that I'm handsome. You're really handsome. But think about think about Cro-Magnon, or the beauty of a woman, right? And then look at a Cro-Magnon woman or a Neanderthal woman, and look at Homo sapien sapien. We just angelic creatures, man. Adonis just popped out of nowhere 200,000 years ago. And then you look at Sitchin's interpretation of the Sumerian text, and lo and behold, the two line up. 200,000 years ago, allegedly, the Anunnaki cloned us 200,000 years ago. 200,000 years ago, Homo sapien sapien showed up with 46 chromosome pairs and not 48 like primates. And so you just kind of back up and go, now, is there something to the Sumerian text and what science is saying? The date is not random, and they tend to line up. So just like everything else, including Plato, and so, is there something to this ancient historical narrative?
Which historical narrative, like the Enuma Elish, or?
Well, the age of Homo sapien, and 200,000 years ago, we just appeared here, but yet in the Sumerian text,
we were created, according to Sitchin, we were created by Enki, right?
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've read the
12th planet.
The 12th planet, yes.
Yeah,
yes. The first of his Earth Chronicles.
yes. I enjoyed Sitchin. I want to stay on the question, but as it goes with all of this stuff, I just keep an open mind, because the more that time goes by, the more incredible things surface, like Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli Tepe wasn't supposed to exist. There was nothing before 3000 BC, and then we've got a site that is 7,000 years older than Giza, and just as romantic, and it wasn't supposed to exist.
Yeah, I have no doubt that we'll continue digging up much older historical sites. No doubt in my mind. I mean, Göbekli Tepe is one such example, and there are similar sites around Göbekli Tepe that are similar, very, very similar, where it was like the circular shape, and they had like the monolithic
T-pillars. Yeah,
the T-pillars. They found similar, but they weren't as great and as large as Göbekli.
You know who was born there? Abraham. And that's the other. Yeah.
Abraham of Ur.
Yes, Abraham of Ur. Yeah.
And although it's argued which Ur,
yeah,
there's an Ur of the Chaldees, right? In Babylon, or there's an Ur over in the Syrian / Eastern Anatolian region. I don't know where exactly, but further up, towards the western parts of the Euphrates, I think. But anyway.
Yeah. So back to the question: when you have you have one story, that is myth and folklore, right? And then the Sumerian text, allegedly, we don't know. And then we have anthropology and science, which is desperately trying to find out where we came from. But the date is too on point.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to because I have a difficult time, and a lot of this is the result of my autism, and that is I base my opinions on facts. And when I say facts, I mean things that are known, discovered, known, analyzed, interpreted. So I've historically, even though I've read the first of his Earth Chronicles, the 12th Planet, I have a hard time subscribing to both him and Von Daniken's Chariot of the Gods books. But I tend to side more with anthropology, even though, yes, you're right, there is a missing link that continues to puzzle scientists today. It's very. I can't subscribe to Sitchin's work.
No, that's. But see, this is where, and I appreciate that. I do. All I am suggesting is when we look at these, the Sumerian Kings list or Sitchin's work or the Sumerian text, I've punched in the search words on the Sumerian tablets. Not all of it is there. I never found gold or gold powder or things like that.
Yes,
That Sitchin, but certainly the Anunnaki and the timeline and the King's list, all of that is there. That's the bizarre part for me, and it's just like maybe there's something more to this, and I'm not sure what's going on, but I think that if we want to be on the right side of history in the future, then what we're being taught isn't the real story. It's all based on, in my opinion, old knowledge, especially when it comes to Egypt. That's most of that was established by Napoleon and the British in the 1800s, and we haven't bent off of most of that even today.
Yeah, and that's something that I've actually. It's interesting that you speak of old knowledge, because it's true that our education system, it needs to be revamped. It needs to be updated. There have been a ton of discoveries since you and I have attended school, and even as my children, my daughter's in high school, my son's in middle school, and even the stuff that they're learning, a lot of it is still outdated. And I mean, they're going to pretty decent school districts, so it's not that the school district can't afford new materials. It's just, for whatever reason, the education system hasn't caught up with a lot of the things that have been discovered. But part of that is also the internet is still maintaining a lot of these old research. For instance, they still talk about the Dorian invasion in Greece during the time of the end of the late Bronze Age in Greece, and to this day there's no evidence of a Dorian invasion. It's sure spoken about in ancient Greek literature, but archaeology has not proven it, and modern academics do not teach it in their colleges. They do not talk about it. They do not write about it. And the only times that they do is to talk about how it has not been proven, and all the evidence suggests otherwise. I mean, that's one such example. Another such example related to Greece is the Greek Dark Age. We call it a Dark Age, but that's because when it was first labeled as a Dark Age, we didn't know enough about it. But since in the last 100 years, in the last 100 years, so many discoveries have been uncovered in ancient Greece that between the time frames of 1200 BC to 800 BC that showed the exact opposite. It wasn't a Dark Age. It didn't thrive. Greece did not thrive as it did during the Mycenaean period in the late Bronze Age period, and during the Archaic period at 800 BC and afterward. But it was far from a Dark Age. The label just stuck. And
dogma turns into truth, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it just stayed in the education system, in the books, on the internet, and we just clung onto it, and we still talk about it as if it's fact. So I agree. We do need to make, as a society, but not just a society, just in the world, we do need to make a much bigger effort to sort of update and bring fresh new material into the classroom, onto the internet. And honestly, the reason why it isn't that way already, I'll be honest with you, I blame academia. I blame the archaeologists. I blame the researchers, because they've made these topics so complicated that it's hard to share with a layperson such as you and myself. And because it's so hard for them to share this data, or they've made it hard for them to share this data, and we don't have this data in a digestible format, we tend to just stick with what we know. We stick with what we've learned and just continue peddling it as if it's gospel. So we still say there's a Greek Dark Age. We still say the Dorians invaded Greece and pushed out the Mycenaeans and so forth. And it's not all archaeologists. Some of them have actually made a concerted effort to try to educate the wider population with materials that are easier for us to consume. One such archaeologist, a friend of mine, and I've spoken with him on my show, Dr. Eric H. Klein. He is a great archaeologist. He has written about the late Bronze Age period. He's written about the quote unquote the Dark Age, the collapse of the late Bronze Age and what followed. And
wait. Let's stop right there for a
Okay.
second. That is one of the most intriguing parts of history.
Yes.
And we know nothing. Right?
Actually, that's not true. We know so much.
But do you understand what I'm saying, though?
Yes.
Do you understand? It is crazy how you can go, and that's why I think the dating is off. I think that some of these events happen much earlier. The chronology doesn't match up to things, because if you look around all of the Mediterranean, from Egypt all the way up and around, right, all of those cultures that were mighty, strong, fortified, solid, economically, trade, everything, boats showed up, and the sea people, it's just like, wait, what are you saying? And they can't even identify the invaders that came and toppled every major city around the entire Mediterranean. So when I say we know nothing, that part of history, that's almost a dark period. And there's no chronological, there's nothing written. We have the oral traditions, and I think
there's so much written. I'm gonna tell you right now.
Oh, bring it to me, Petros.
There is so much written. It's in the most unlikely places. So let's go back in time when we first learned about the Sea Peoples, from first translating the Egyptian texts, right?
Who do you think the Sea Peoples were? Phoenicians?
Well, no, it was multiple nations. And I'll get to that. I will get to that. So,
was it the Greeks? The Greeks are always the bad
guys. The Greeks were part of it. The Sardinians were part of it. Ancient Sicilians and Greeks, from Crete or the mainland, and assorted Aegean islands. There were even some from Anatolia, the coastal regions, and so forth. And
was it a coalition?
No, I'm sure at times they did come together and created a single unit of multiple nations. But the thing is, we have so much more text than we realize. The fact is that Homer's telling of both the Trojan War and the Odyssey, it was essentially capturing this period following the the late Bronze Age collapse. So we get insight into the Sea Peoples and what made up some of the Sea Peoples in Homer's telling. For instance, in the Odyssey, forgive me, but I think it was in book 3. I may be wrong, and sometimes I am, but in book 3, Telemachus travels around Greece to try to find evidence for his father still living. And in the process, he visits Menelaus in Sparta. And Menelaus tells him, on my way home, I traveled to so-and-so place, and then this place and that place. I plundered this place. I did this. And you're like, wait a minute. This sounds a lot like Sea People's activity. And you get these snippets here and there that are reminiscent of activities that the Egyptians spoke about. But it's not just that. We also read about the Sea Peoples in the Bible. Biggest group of Sea Peoples were the Philistines, the Peleset, the Pelishti, as the as they were also referred to. But they were spoken about as the primary enemy of the ancient Israelites. But we also have what was the name of the song in the book of Judges? The song of, was it the Song of Deborah? But anyway, it speaks of the Shekelesh. And the Shekelesh was another Sea People's tribe. So, I mean, we see evidence here and there in other sources that we were not necessarily looking for the Sea Peoples to begin with. But the thing is,
I'm going to classify everybody as anthropologists. The ancient historians. I'll go with that too as well. Want to lump all of this together. That the fall of all of those cities all happened generally around the same time, and what could be that big? Because when you look at these individual cities and city states that were around the Mediterranean, these were powerful, they were solid, they were economically very important and viable. They were all trading. And they were established, and they just got conquered by people on boats, not an invading land army, right? We're talking about boats, a few dudes getting off of a boat and marching into a castle and killing every man, woman, and child. That's the historical narrative. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's what, historically has been what we were brought up to believe at the end of the late Bronze Age, 1200 BC. But so going back to Eric Klein, he actually published a book called 1177 BC, The Year Civilization Collapsed.
Great book. I have it.
It is.
Great book.
Good. So he talks about, he builds on top of other theories, and such as Robert Drews, and who actually wrote quite extensively about this period. And although he focused on the change of warfare being the root cause, or what started and snowballed into the eventual collapse. And then you have what from the 70s, Nancy Saunders and so forth. But Eric Klein builds on top of all these older theories. He modernizes them with modern science. He incorporates sciences from climatology and geology and other things, and comes to build a larger picture. His conclusion was it wasn't one thing. It wasn't also a domino effect where one thing, like in this serialized chronology, it wasn't one thing that led to another. For whatever reason, during that stretch of a couple hundred years, we were going through a lot of climate change. And climate change was creating drier conditions where people were not, able to grow enough food to sustain themselves. There were a lot more earthquakes, and it's not like today where you have foreign nations coming to your aid if an earthquake takes your city down, right? Or if a foreign nation is, wants to attack your town or citadel. If you have an alliance with another ruler, maybe they'll show up. But if they're facing similar troubles, they're not going to show up. So what you have all these separate events, and when you add these separate events together, it sort of shows you how multiple nations would have been impacted, and what would have been the result of that. Migrations. people would have just gotten up and tried to find another way of life and find opportunities elsewhere, enter the sea peoples. But I think in Greece, because this is the majority of the sea peoples came from the Aegean and a little further west, like I said, Sardinia and Sicily and so forth. And I think what encouraged a lot of the Aegean ones to come in was not necessarily just the result of earthquakes and so forth and climate change. It was also the disruption of trade routes. To date, one of the best archaeological discoveries is the Uluburun shipwreck. And the Uluburun shipwreck shows us the extent of the old world economy and what was being traded and how this would have provided so much across this.
I agree with that. I agree with that. The only where I always throw up a red flag is that couldn't they have been easily identified? Why were they labeled as sea people? All of the toppling that happened was never identified to a specific culture. But it seems that with those trade routes, when you've got olive oil coming in from Sicily, right? When you've got goods coming in from Greece, when you've got, who these people are pulling into these ports. And everybody seems to be not only unidentified, but labeled as sea peoples, when I would think that clearly they knew exactly who was invading.
Yeah, the problem is it's text, right? And all we have is names, save for a few murals in like Medinet Habu in Egypt that show Philistines.
Well, in the book, but in the book in 1177 BC, in that book, he has got the correspondence between a couple of kings.
Yes,
that
like
were
between Ugarit and
going, dude, get down here, right?
Well, the problem
people are invading. We need some help.
We got lucky. We got lucky with those letters, those Amarna, like those letters, those correspondences between the Egyptian pharaoh and the king of Ugarit, because those correspondences were actually preserved because they were baked in the fire from the destruction of the sea peoples. Right?
That is correct. That is correct.
Yeah, the only reason why we have those texts is because of that destruction. So maybe we need to thank those sea peoples for destroying them, but we don't know.
But it's kind of weird. Across the board, nobody was identified. Now, before we run out of time, we're going to hit the break. And we can come back to this because as you can tell, it's a
topic. Yeah,
fascinating. It's one of the crazy and it's kind of like it's another version of the Dark Ages where it just doesn't. It's not talked about like it should be, and it's such an important point of history, man. 1200 BC, woo, when worlds collide for real, right?
Yeah.
So, but I wanted to ask you.
I like the Power Man 5000 reference. So.
Yeah. Oh, well played. Well played. You know what? They were a good band. They were a good band.
Yeah. That was a good album.
Yeah, it was a good 6 months they were here, and then just kind of I don't know. Maybe about a year. But they were a good band. It was a good time. Anyway, is Atlantis and Robert Schoch. And so Robert said to me one time, I just dropped my guitar pick. I have OCD. I will do everything I can to resist picking it up. No, I can't. I can't do it. I gotta pick it up. I gotta pick. Okay. All right. Robert Schoch said to me, great geologist, professor at Boston University and so forth. He said to me once, he goes, you know what, man? I can't say the A word in academia. I said, what's that? He goes, you think I'm going to say aliens? I can say aliens now. I just can't say Atlantis. And yeah. And so, but when we look at the possibilities of that, it seems, now, I don't know. I'm on the fence. I want it to be real, but I'm on the fence. But it seems that every culture has got a flood myth tied to it. It's not just Noah in the Bible. It's every culture on the
That's
planet
true.
has got that tied into it. What do you make of that? Do you think there was a cosmic event and something catastrophic at the end of the last ice age, or that Atlantis possibly was real and that's what everybody was talking about?
To me, that is two separate topics, not connected. And I can get into more details because I have some interesting things to say about Atlantis that we can revisit after the Sea Peoples in the next in the second half.
Let's do that. So, what side of the fence are you in the middle on Atlantis? Or do you have an open mind, or do you think that there's something historical here?
Well, I'm going to say Thera. Because I think I think at Thera, and I will explain it to you. I think we have the map of Atlantis at Thera preserved today.
Well played. So, Plato's version, which much has been made about that over the years, but this is what I find interesting about it. Don't know if Atlantis is real. Could be Thera. Could be Crete, man. I don't know. Could be outside of Gibraltar. Could be out in the Atlantic somewhere. Could be there too as well. Could be in the Indian Ocean. I don't know. But I'll say this. What I find interesting is the comments in the Edfu Builders text and the timing of Göbekli Tepe and other historical sites around the world where it seems that somebody was doing some teaching. Somebody taught the builders of Göbekli Tepe engineering and quarrying and how to move stones. And then you have Egypt and what was happening there 10,000 years prior. You have the Epic of Gilgamesh and other stories that all seem to represent somebody surviving something and coming to town with knowledge. That's what I find interesting. And were they Atlanteans? I don't know, but I think that everything is taught. I don't think anything is just learned. I think you are taught things. And that's what I always find so compelling. So we'll do that and much more. All right, you ready? Let's take our quick break. Petros Koutoupis is with us. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Göbekli Tepe. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, we're talking about ancient history tonight, ancient mysteries. Petros Koutoupis is with us, coming to us live from Chicago, by the way, my hometown. And Petros, this is, you know why I learned all of my Greek history? From North Chicago. Where? North Chicago. You know, if you know what I mean, one of the great things about Chicago, and I know I'm not planting a flag here, are the neighborhoods. You have your Greek neighborhood, an Italian neighborhood. You cross the block and you're into a Polish neighborhood, and you go this, and you know where you are by the smell of the food.
That's very true.
It is. It's just it's absolutely, you know. And so what? You know, my mom would say things like, "We're going to dinner tonight. We're going to go to Mount Olympus, or we're going to go to, you know, these Greek restaurants, you know, and things that it out here in LA, it's all mixed up. In Los Angeles, we don't have but Chicago, man, it's about the neighborhood, man, block to block, and it is just a wonderful mix of cultures.
No, it is, and it's one thing that I truly appreciate about the region. I mean, it's not unique to Chicago. New York has, you know, the similar setup,
yep.
Right? But I'm from Chicago, and it's something that I've grown to appreciate. The whole multicultural, it puts things into perspective, and it gives you an appreciation for the world around you. So,
yeah, it's true.
Nice.
My big fat Greek wedding was a documentary. It was a documentary.
Yeah, actually, you know, it's funny that you bring that up, because I remember when the movie first came out, everyone would be like, "Hey, you know, is that your family? Is that your family?" Well, maybe not to that extreme, but yes, I grew up where the Greeks,
exactly. Yes.
the Greeks invented everything, according to my parents, especially my father. You know, everything was Greek in origin. The Greeks. There was a saying that from the movie where there are two types of people in this world. You know, you have Greeks and those who want to be Greek. And honestly, in our household, that was the mindset. And I mean,
you know what? Let's leave it right there, because, like I said, it's a documentary. It's so close. It's so close. That one scene, he's a vegetarian. Oh, I cook lamb.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one of the best scenes. Okay, so let's go back to the Sea Peoples for a second. And I brought up the Phoenicians earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And the Phoenicians, oddly enough, it's another strange part of history where, you know, honestly, it's like a label. It's a catch-all.
Yes.
It's a catch-all.
Like the Sea Peoples is. I mean, it's a label that encompasses multiple cultures, because in the Canaanite region where the Sea People, where the Phoenicians, you know, are from, the label was given to them by the Greeks, but on their own, they were, you know, from Byblos or Tyre or where, you know, so they were Tyrians. They were whatever the ancient, you know, people from Byblos referred to themselves. I think Gubla was the ancient name for Byblos, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, ancient Canaan, following the collapse of the late Bronze Age period, because that region was actually contested for between the Hittites to the north and the Egyptians to the south. They were controlling that region. So when the Canaanites were freed from imperial rule from the north and the south, they broke apart into multiple city-states, and out of that came the Phoenicians along the coastal regions. But yes, the Greeks, being Greeks, to simplify their understanding of that part of the world, they're like, oh, that's just the Phoenicians. And I think the
Do you
name.
think that? Okay,
Yeah.
so even the Hittites are a big mystery too, as well, and it's for me trying to get real answers about what was going on there. But they seem to be technically advanced, and Egypt, taken by surprise a few times. The wheel, and chariots and things like this. Where did this technology come from, and who were they really? I think it's always fascinating going back to the Phoenicians or the Sea Peoples, and the Hittites that are mentioned so often. There are scholars out there that'll say, well, no, it's this. Well, we don't really know. We have to base it on the historical text of the Bible and oral tradition.
Yeah, the Hittites in the Bible are understood to be the Neo-Hittites of the Iron Age period. And once the Neo-Hittites, once the Hittite Empire collapsed at around 1200 BC, this is, the listeners are going to hear the same date, because it's not the exact date. It's just a reference date, that we use to signify the end of the Bronze Age and the start of the Iron Age. So like the name Phoenician, it's a catch-all, right? But anyway, once the Hittite Empire collapsed, you had these city-states that sort of cropped up with these little micro kingdoms, and we refer to these as the Neo-Hittites because culturally they were still similar to the Hittites. They still did a lot of what the Hittites did in terms of religious practices, and some of them continued to speak similar Indo-European languages, primarily Luwian. So I don't know if the listener knows what Luwian is, but it was another Indo-European language that was actually a lot more common in Western and Southern Anatolia. But anyway, the southern parts of the Neo-Hittite states also spoke Aramaic, and these are the ones that Abraham of the Bible would have interacted with. But again, a lot of people that believe the dating of the Bible to be, undeniably true. When I say dating, the dating accurate, yes, the writings being accurate. Don't necessarily agree with it being the Neo-Hittites of the Iron Age, but the way that the Hittites were spoken of, it just aligns and it makes more sense. But yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Sea Peoples though. That's where we were leaving off.
Yes.
Okay.
So I was go.
No,
I'm getting ahead of myself.
On you. It's on you. No, you had something very important to follow up with the Sea People.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the fact that, what encouraged the Sea Peoples was from my personal research, was the interruption of not only the inability for them to find a sustainable way of living in their native homelands, but the interruption of a lot of these trade routes limited a lot of these goods from coming in, and again, unable for them to maintain their way of life. So they were opportunists, and it wasn't necessarily them going and pillaging and fighting and burning down entire cities, although we do have documented evidence that in some cases that actually happened. We also see in the Egyptian reliefs that they came with their families. They came with their cattle. They came with their entire livelihood, everything that they had. So their goal was not to just burn down their city. Their goal was to find a new place to start a new life, because back at home, there was nothing. Back at home, there was internal revolts. I mean, at the end of the Bronze Age, the palace centers, at Mycenae, at Pylos, at Terrans, and so forth, there were a lot of internal revolts where the lower class were revolting against the elite, the upper class, and burning down these.
They burned it
citadels.
down. It was easy to burn down because there was a drought going on too as well.
Yes,
And yes, so yeah, they were invading because they were hungry, and if you
pretty much, or
yeah.
they needed to find work, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
We see a lot of them coming to Egyptian shores because the Egyptians wrote about it. And you have pharaohs such as Merneptah and even Ramses III relocating some. Yeah. So not only do we see them battling them against the sea peoples at the Nile Delta region, in some cases they were relocating them further east into the Sinai/Levantine region, which is where the Philistines came into the picture. So they were part of that group. So they were introduced into Canaan around this time period, and over time they became a natural competitor or enemy against the Israelites.
Now, going back to I'm going to say Atlantis, but I don't mean only Atlantis for context. Okay. But this is where I have a roadblock, not only with Orthodox academia, but my own research. And this is my roadblock. At 3000 BC, we went from globally, we'll specifically talk about Mesopotamia and Giza, where we went from allegedly nomadic tribes wearing animal skins, foraging in the dirt for seeds for dinner, to virtually one night to the next, a firm grasp of everything. An upright civilization, laws, mathematics, engineering, road building, music, agriculture, the domestication of things, all of this happened from one night to the next. And if you go from, and you specifically look at 3000 BC, where you had nomadic tribes in the desert, whether it was Mesopotamia and in Iraq or in the Sahara Desert, coming in and suddenly building cities and monuments and things where the day before they weren't. That is where it seems that somebody was teaching somebody something. Either these structures are much, much older than what we're told, and it wasn't 3000 BC, but at 3000 BC, we had writing. You know what I mean? We had taxes. We had, but before that, it was nomadic tribes. And that's where I hit a roadblock with all of this. I think there's something very, very huge here that either we don't know or we're just simply not being told.
No, that's okay. So this is where academia has failed us. But before, and I'll get to that. Before I get to that, I want to fast forward to the last, the end of the 1990s and early aughts. Okay, so early 2000s.
Okay, all right.
And think about the technology world. We went from computer technologies that evolved slowly. Think about the Pentium processor. In the early 1990s, we were in the teens in terms of megahertz processing, right? And it was slowly doubling. And by the time we get to the early 2000s, all of a sudden, the way we started progressing and evolving in technology just skyrocketed. We couldn't keep up with, as consumers of this technology, we couldn't keep up with things anymore. And we were buying new computers every year.
Monthly. I would say
month.
monthly. I would go monthly.
So
Yeah.
it
was pretty crazy.
But why? Because we were building on top of older ideas, but not just that, we were sharing information. We were in a now very connected world thanks to the internet, where all of this was being shared, these ideas, these thoughts, the code. I think about the open source community with Linux and so forth. I mean, people were just sharing these ideas and building better products as a result. So let's now go back in time.
It's a good metaphor, though.
Yes.
It's a good metaphor. And you come from a computer background. That's your life.
Yes.
And it's an easy metaphor. So if you take that metaphor and apply it to what I just suggested, then languages, written languages, taxes, roads, engineering, mathematics, the cosmos, the stars, all of that was taught. It came, and how does a nomadic tribe wearing animal skins build on information to have an upright city and civilization? Completely upright. They weren't sort of upright. Mesopotamia, think about where it just like out of nowhere.
The Mesopotamian cities did not just pop up out of nowhere. You had the Ubaidian period that predated them, that preceded them. In the Ubaidian period, we see in the archaeological record a gradual process when a lot of these earlier layers of these city states started to crop up around the Mesopotamian region. And the Ubaidians, as a culture, were traveling as far west as Syria and sharing ideas with other cultures in the Syrian region. And we have evidence for this. So
no, we do. We do. But hold on. You're right. And I absorb all of this. That part of it was definitely gradual. And it probably went the construction and we can see that in the ideas for roads and stuff. It came down over 2,000 or 3,000 years of kingdoms coming and going. I get that, and how it went south. I understand that. But at 3000 BC, writing happened.
Well, writing was also a gradual process, and we see that actually again in the Ubaidian period, where the earliest I'm not going to dig it out right now, but
it's okay.
Amanda Podani wrote a book called what was it called? Just give me 1 second. It was called Weavers, Scribes, and Kings. And in that book, she actually details a 5,000 year period of Mesopotamia. And she actually provides the context, the details of how writing evolved from simple, just little circles and dots pressed into clay tablets, and then becoming a more complex system to start capturing real words. It was a gradual process. Writing did not just show up. The idea was to capture inventory. And as it evolved, and we see
same with the Egyptians,
and the Mycenaeans and every other culture, it started to capture inventory, but it started very primitive. And we see that in the early Ubaidian period. So from that, we start to see the evolution. And like I said,
have you read the book? Have you? Another great book is Egypt Before the Pharaohs.
No, I have not. But the pre-dynastic period is something that has always fascinated me.
Yeah, Egypt Before the Pharaohs covers 300,000 years, and it's a fascinating book. But it's the knowledge and the gradual. When you cover a 300,000 year period, there's a few things that need to also come into play here. Population, how many people were living in these countries, and in most cases, and especially in Iraq and that area, Syria, the Armenian highlands, which is now modern day Turkey, of course, and Egypt. Population wasn't huge. Population was very, 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 very small and very thin. and the amount of technology that was created in these areas, something from nothing, is pretty incredible. And so even in Egypt, with Egypt before the pharaohs, this is where I keep going back to Atlantis. It just seems that there were some teachers from another culture, from somewhere else, that was fairly advanced, especially advanced for that time, that survived something and brought their knowledge to these cultures, and they got a serious jump start. And I'm pretty confident in that position.
No, and I respect that. I tend to believe that during these early periods, a lot of the exchanges between multiple cultures help build on older ideas, or help motivate newer ideas, and help advance certain cultures. But another key motivator to help invent new technologies was also war. The ability to take over other countries, other regions, and their resources, and so forth. And then all of a sudden, I mean, look at Rome. Rome was one of the most perfect examples, and their writing is so well preserved that we can easily reference it. And one of the things that we see is their inventions were inspired to help not only live more comfortably in the country or in the regions, but also to help take over other regions. But
to kill people. You
exactly,
can say.
no, exactly, to kill
You
other people, and consume their resources for your own.
What about here's another. I love, since we're talking about Greece and Rome, this is another to me, just completely mind-blowing. When the pyramids were built, if we go with orthodox dating, right?
Mhm.
Okay. When the pyramids were built, let's just pull out a number, 2800 BC, 2750 BC, some number. It's arbitrary, but let's go with that. Greece didn't happen for another 2,000 years.
Well,
Wait, let me finish. Rome didn't happen for another 2,500 years. And Rome was mud huts at 800 BC.
yes.
Mud huts. Yeah, that's crazy. And to think, and you back up 2,000 years, 2,000 years, man. 2,000 years before that. That's how old Egypt is. And we just don't fully appreciate that kind of number. It's just so mind-blowing.
No, it is. The thing is, once you put things into context, and also when you visit a lot of these sites yourself, it's mind-blowing. Like you said, it's crazy to think that this site is however many thousand years old. However many thousand years older than you. I mean, you go to the pyramids and you're like, wow, this is almost 5,000 years old. I mean, that's crazy.
It's crazy. Have you been to the Bent Pyramid?
No, I have not.
Okay. Have you been to Giza?
No, I haven't gone to Egypt, and it's something that I plan to do very soon.
It's a humbling experience. It's a humbling experience. And I don't like to use bad words on this show, but when you go to Peru too, is the same, has the same impact. But you walk up to the Bent Pyramid, forget about the Great Pyramid. Okay. Great Pyramid, there's all the tourism, and it's at the edge of Cairo, and it's great. It's the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx and all that. But when you go to the Bent Pyramid, which allegedly predates the Great Pyramid, right? And so you're out there in the middle of Saqqara, in the middle of the Sahara Desert, right? Sand dunes, right? And there it is, kapow. And it's just as big as the Great Pyramid. It's smaller by a couple of feet, right? But it's just freaking huge. And you walk up on that and you go, man, I don't know. But what they're teaching us is bullshit. That's all you can think of. It's that big, and it's just in the middle of nowhere. It's huge. You stand in front of it, you can't see it all. You have to turn your head. It's that big. It's crazy.
No, I believe you. And again, like you said, I'm sure you get the same feeling from all three of the major pyramids at Giza as well. I imagine even the step pyramid. Joseph.
The step pyramid is just as there is things about that too as well, because that predates everything. Again, allegedly. I say allegedly because honestly, I mean, you look at Senefre and we, the records and the things that we have are just non-existent. But that being said, the step pyramid looks all raggedy. It's not.
Well, time has not been good to it.
No. It's been just fine. You see it in person, and it's beautiful, man. You walk right up on it, and it doesn't look like it does in pictures. No, it makes a lot of sense, and it's beautiful, and it's purposeful, and it's artistic, and it's majestic. You look at it in pictures, and it looks like a pile of mud bricks. No, and it's got 10 kilometers of tunnels underneath it. Yeah, 10
Some
kilometers.
of which are collapsed in there. So I'm. Do they even allow tourists inside?
If you do this, you can do anything you want in Egypt. Trust me on that. I'm not saying anything else. But anyway, when you look at something like that and the complexity of it, and you just back off of it and go, Stone Age man, huh? Okay, all right. Pre-Bronze Age, pre-everything. It's like, I don't know. You see the unfinished obelisk over in Aswan, and you see that, 2,500 tons. 2,500 tons.
Yeah.
The Phoenicians never had anything, a boat. What was the plan? What was the plan? They had to get that thing out.
Yeah.
And set it to the side, let alone get it down the hill to the Nile or across the Nile or tow it to what was the plan? I don't know, man. It's just, I don't know. I don't know.
It's crazy. And that we're still trying to figure out how they moved a lot of this stuff. It's amazing. And that's why it's a mystery, because we don't have those answers. But yeah, it's funny because while we think about how old some of these cultures are, the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, Greece started archaic Greece as we know it started at 800 BC, so thousands of years later. But then you think about other cultures in between that dominated the Aegean region, such as the Minoans. And I don't know if you want to transition to Atlantis yet.
Well, yeah, we can. Actually, that's a really good point, because that's where I was going. And the Minoan culture,
they were advanced as well.
Preserved. Yeah, thank God it's preserved. I mean, that's some of the most beautiful stuff that has ever been created.
Yeah. The thing with the Minoans is, and I had befriended Dr. Neno Marinatos. She is the daughter of Spiridon Marinatos, who was the one who discovered Akrotiri. And she used to teach out of one of the local universities here in Chicago. And I used to meet her every now and then. And it's just, what I find fascinating is she actually told me something that just kind of blew my mind. I didn't expect it. And once I gave it more thought, it just made sense. To date, we don't know the Minoan language. We know bits and pieces. So for the listeners out there, we've discovered Minoan writing. Linear A is the name that was given to it by Sir Arthur Evans, who labeled this culture, who properly identified and labeled this culture as Minoan after King Minos of Greek mythology. And we don't know the language, as I said, but we do know the Mycenaean Greek language, and the Mycenaean Greeks actually took over the thalassocracy that the Minoans had a hold of across the entire region. And they wrote in a writing style that was very similar, almost identical to the Minoans, called Linear B. We've translated that. That's the oldest form of written Greek. That's why we call them the Mycenaean Greeks. And they were the people that Homer spoke of in his golden age, or his age of heroes. But anyway, I don't want to talk about the Mycenaeans. I want to talk about the Minoans. So using what we understand of how to read Linear B, we apply a lot of the same logic with the Linear A. And we've come to understand that it's an Indo-European language, but we know that it doesn't relate to Greek, and we know that it may hold more similarities with Luvian and other Indo-European languages of the Anatolian region. But anyway, the Minoans were a very advanced civilization. They had indoor plumbing and working toilets. They had earthquake-proof buildings, because the Aegean was, riddled with earthquakes. Even to this day, there's earthquakes all the time in that area. So they were a very advanced culture. I mean, not advanced enough to build pyramids, but they were advanced in their own right. They were able to navigate the seas like the Egyptians couldn't navigate the seas like they did.
No, they stayed on the shorelines, allegedly, again.
Yes. And so it was the thing is, with their control of the Aegean region, they spread their influence everywhere, and that included the Aegean islands in the Cyclades that included the Thera, what is also referred to as Santorini. And Thera, as many listeners would know, is pretty well known for the eruption that occurred at around 1600 BC. And for a long time, we believe that this eruption was what contributed to the weakening of the Minoan Empire that resulted in the Mycenaeans taking over shortly afterward. But what archaeologists have also concluded is that this eruption at around 1600 BC may also have inspired Plato's telling of the story of Atlantis. The A word that academia doesn't like to say, because of just how crazy the interpretation of Atlantis has gotten in the public eye. There's just, everyone has a theory, everyone has an idea, and so forth. But once upon a time, the same was said for Troy, and even when Heinrich Schliemann proposed the location of Troy at Hissarlik, the academia world laughed at him and
completely laughed at him.
And in time, it was finally understood, oh, maybe he's got something here. And over time, we discovered a series of events that over a 200-year span, that if you put together, builds a story that's sort of reminiscent of Homer's telling of the tale, but shifting back to Atlantis. So in one of the buildings, Thera erupts and destroys part of the island, but at the same time buries sites such as Akrotiri under pumice and ash. So Spiridon Marinatos, on a hunch and through a series of events, discovers Akrotiri, and to this day, we're still excavating. I don't even know how much we believe we excavated it, but it may be in the teens, like 15%, 13% of the site. I mean, the site is huge, and we only dug out like a small fraction. And while we're digging things out, we're restoring things and so forth. But in one of the buildings, there's a painting, because the Minoans are very well known for their art. Their art was so popular in the Bronze Age that Minoan artists were commissioned in the Levant, in Egypt, such as Avaris, the Hyksos capital. There is Minoan art that was found there during the the Hyksos rule of the region. But if you go to this particular building, there is a fresco called the Flotilla fresco. It's a very famous fresco, and it shows a huge image of an island, a bunch of ships, and another island. The first island, all the way to the left, is Thera. But the way Thera is depicted is very, very, very interesting. You have a person, you have what appears to be the location of Akrotiri, and the location of that building with an individual like sitting at the top, looking straight out. And right next to it is another piece of land with another set of buildings. But what's in between them? It's a ring of water. This starts to conjure up images of the way Plato described Atlantis. You have an island in the center, a ring of water, a ring of land, although in Plato's telling, there's another ring of water, another ring of land. But we see an actual depiction of what Plato describes to some degree in this flotilla fresco.
It's a cityscape.
Yes, and the thing is,
Yeah.
the island in the center is where the volcano is today. So what the picture is showcasing is that where Akrotiri stands, it looks out towards the center of Thera, and at one point in time before the eruption, there was a city at the center that the volcano at the point of eruption just toppled and brought down into the sea, which again was, reminiscent of the telling of the destruction of Atlantis by Plato. Now, on the other side of this fresco, you see another island which is believed to potentially be Crete or something. But to me, this is a visual representation of Atlantis. And it depicts the island of Thera, which is why I believe this is exactly what Plato was alluding to. Now, as far as dating is concerned, by the time the story reached Plato, I mean, this tale of the Minoans, I mean, they didn't know the Minoans existed anymore. I mean,
Sure. That part is true, but it also depicts. I love that painting, by the way. It's beautiful, and I have a reproduction of it, and so I have stared at it many times, and it shows. I'm going off of memory. It's in the other room. I could go and look at, but it shows a buttload of ships.
Yes,
it shows the navigation of the Mediterranean. It shows no fear of the sea, right? And a command of that. And like I said, the island itself, it looks like a cityscape. It's not quite Manhattan, but these buildings are multi-storied.
Yes.
And people are on the top of them looking out and looking, I guess that's east, if you're going to orientate it that way, right? But they're all looking at the flotilla going in that direction. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of artwork for sure, but there's a lot of representation going on there. But okay, so if we stay there though, Petros, then there are some serious errors. Now, I'm not saying the Minoan Empire wasn't what it is, because I believe it is what it is. But how could Plato get two huge facts so far off? Now, first off, this was told to him. It was handed down. It was an oral tradition.
Well, he overheard it.
He overheard it. Well, it was okay. So, but 9,000 years prior, that's a big error. And outside of Gibraltar, right? So that's two glaring things for somebody to have gotten wrong. But Plato was there. It was around 400 BC, 500 BC, right? Okay, so there's that part. The eruption happened at 1600 BC, so about 1,000 years before Plato. A lot can go wrong in the game of telephone, right?
Yeah. And Solon, who was told this story by the Egyptians, again, you have, like you said, this long game of telephone, and you're going across multiple languages, multiple cultures, the multiple methods of time telling. The Egyptians preserved time differently than the Greeks did, and so forth. And yes, a lot of things could have gone wrong during the transmission of this tale. But also,
but okay, hold on. You brought up Solon. I keep interrupting you, Petros.
That's okay.
After the show, send me a long email. This is the last time. But anyway, but Solon and certainly Plato, as they were doing their best to collect information, and I get that. And you got to think about this expanse of time that we're talking about, and most of it at that point is under sand anyway. But neither of them had any reference to the Edfu builder's text, which was 300-400 miles south of Giza in the Temple of Edfu on the Nile River, where there they have the 10,000-year history of Egypt, founded by those that survived a flood and destruction. And so is that referencing Plato, or is that referencing Atlantis, unbeknownst to Plato or Solon? And there was depicted in a chronological linear description of Egyptian history.
I don't know. That's something, like as I mentioned earlier, I take flood narratives as a completely separate topic as Atlantean narratives. I don't necessarily couple them as one and the same.
Well, no, I don't either. I know. Okay, I said it wrong. And I apologize. In the Egyptian builders' text, they say that the founders of Egypt arrived 10,000 years before. Okay, and because their land was destroyed. Okay, and it was described as an island that was destroyed and went into the ocean. That's what I'm referring to. That Plato's version lines up with the Edfu builders' text. Yet we have this separate incident with the Minoan culture. And Santorini, by the way, you look at Santorini, that looks like Atlantis to me. It does.
Well,
if you're going to take a description from Plato and apply it and overlay something, Santorini checks all the boxes.
Well, here's the thing. Three things about Greeks, modern and ancient. Okay. One of which is we're miserable people. We like to complain. That's what gave birth to the Socratic method. It's just we like to complain about things. Western philosophy was built on complaining Greeks. The other thing is that we exaggerate. We use our arms a lot and exaggerate and things such as numbers of things. It's just it's just hundreds, thousands. But anyway, the third thing is, in the ancient world, we see in the writings of ancient authors a tendency for the Greek writers to try to find similarities of their cultures with others. Saying, oh, this is their version of our Hercules. This is their version of our goddess, blah, 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 or their version of this event, blah, blah, blah. Do I think that maybe Solon or somebody else would have tried to find some sort of correlation with these events? So when, like, maybe the Egyptian priest at Sais, when he was sharing this Atlantean story, maybe he was talking to him about the Kefchu, which was the name of the ancient Minoan culture, the Minoans, that they either called themselves, but the Egyptians at least called them that. Maybe as they were telling him the story, they tried to find some sort of correlation with within their own stories, and this is just a way for them to tie it to Egyptian events and so forth. So the story evolved from what the original telling may have been. I don't know. Sure, there are similarities, but it's not one where I with confidence can say it's one and the same, or that that one tale inspired or that one original inspired multiple tellings across different cultures.
Yeah, you're right about that. Where there's smoke, there's fire, but you've got to get to it somehow.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the difficult thing. But so how do you resolve in your mind's eye consistent things around the world, like Baalbek in Lebanon, or the Assyrian in Egypt, to the Temple of the Sun on the top of Ollantaytambo in Peru, where you have these 150-ton stones at Sacsayhuaman or Baalbek, or Aswan, where the answer is you're not giving Stone Age man enough credit. Well, that's not an answer to how they were quarrying these stones and how they were moving them around before they had the wheel. And in most cases, no horses, and in most cases, no trees either. Right? These were arid climates without the ability to have trees. And in Egypt, all of the lumber that they imported from Lebanon. Right? They didn't have any trees there. All the cedar that is in Egypt came from Lebanon.
Yeah.
Right. So, and again, without the horse and without the wheel. So how do you resolve all of these cultures around the world, seemingly able to move these 100-ton stones that today ships with that kind of displacement, or trains or trucks, we can't do that, but they did.
Well, I mean, the simple answer is I don't know. I don't know. It's a
good answer.
It's something that continues to fascinate us, hence the whole mysteries aspect. And the idea that an elder culture, or a culture that predated these civilizations, it's a romantic one, where we want to think that there's something older, something that we don't know. I mean, just the idea of a mystery just intrigues us, which is part of the reason why I started to go on my personal journey. For me, I mean, you can see this is not the extent. I have a lot more bookshelves around my office that surround me. So, I mean, you can see that I am pretty much a well-read individual that just dives into these things. But as far as why,
you think it was Merlin? You think it was Merlin? You think it was I mean,
Maybe. I mean, if he had a time machine, he could go back in time and.
no, I know, right? I know that's the romantic side of it, right there. A time machine and going back and getting the answers. Maybe we just aren't supposed to know.
Well,
And maybe they had something that has been forgotten and lost in time. And I'm not saying it was this, but it might have been something else just as crazy that is just forgotten in time.
yeah, well, that's part of the challenge, right? Because the problem with how archaeology is a very biased science. We tend to interpret this through our biased viewpoints. And that includes not just the culture itself, but also their traditions, their religions. A lot of the earliest archaeologists were, Christian Westerners. So everything had to be compared to the Bible. So when early, for example, Sumerian and Akkadian tablets were discovered and deciphered, Babylonian ones, when George Smith first translated the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, he found the flood story. And he got so excited that he began to undress himself. And I mean, it just the fact that it consumed him, it overtook him to the point where he consumed himself or undressed himself. And following that point, he went on a journey, for lack of a better term, to not only decipher the rest of the tablet.
It was a quest.
Yeah, a quest. That's a better term. Yeah. It's almost 11 o'clock here, so my brain is starting to wind down. But anyway, so he went on a quest to discover more stories that aligned with the Bible. There was a book that he published. What was it called? Everything's on these bookshelves, and he published another book that actually showed Babylonian stories and their biblical counterparts. So the idea that he could relate these tales to the Bible, he showed how everything was viewed through a Western biblical lens, and the same could be said for every other culture. So the fact is, with this biased viewpoint, and it's not just being Christian or being a Westerner, it's any culture, and just the way we as a society function. When we approach a new discovery, whether we're discovering a new culture or a new site such as Göbekli Tepe, we're trying to rationalize with what we know how the ancients accomplished this thing. And like you mentioned not long ago, they could have very well used the technology or method that we would have never even conceived or thought about, and it was just hidden
and easy. And easy.
Yeah, it could have been something so simple, so ridiculously simple, and we're just overthinking it, right?
Completely overthinking it. That's why the Nephilim are aliens. I think that's where it all came from. That's my. Can we, in the little time that we have left, when you look at the Bible, I think it's very I did this 30, 40 years ago. Started looking at it as just pure science fiction, like a really good alien invasion story. And that's, and when you look at some of these terms now today in a modern context, the Watchers and the Nephilim, are these things that we need to take? Are these people? Are these biological creatures things that we should take seriously? And how do you interpret what was trying to be described to us?
Wow, this deserves another 2 hours. So
you want to come back? You want to come back? I'll bring you back and we'll do a Nephilim.
Yes, no, I'm serious. I can speak for 2 hours about the Nephilim, and I will tell you right now that again, I know I've mentioned this multiple times. Being the autistic individual that I am and hyper focusing, 20 years ago, I actually started to teach myself a basic level of biblical Hebrew to be able to read the text, the Hebrew text that that covers the Nephilim and many more other biblical topics in the Old Testament, so I can understand how it was said and try to come up with my own interpretations. And honestly, with the approaches that I've taken, what makes it easier to decipher, because the Nephilim are only spoken of in two separate verses in the Old Testament, in the Pentateuch specifically, or what the Jews call the Torah. And they are spoken of in one verse in the book of Genesis and another verse in the book of Numbers. And in both those verses, we don't get a clear understanding except for one phrase. Now,
what's that?
Well, at the very end, here, I will.
Well, we only have 2 minutes.
Right,
we only have 2 minutes. Don't worry about it.
I only need 30 seconds. So in Genesis 6:4, okay, Genesis 6:4, I will start by reading the original Hebrew, and it's just me showing off a bit, but 6:4. Okay, so Hagiborim Asher Meolam Anashech Hashem. Okay, so Hagiborim Asher Meolam, mighty men of old, and then Anashech Hashem, men of renown. And the reason why that verse is so important is because it gives you insight into what they were. And in my personal research, they were heroes. There was the early Israelite authors had their own heroic age that was very consistent and reminiscent of what the Greeks spoke about, what the Mesopotamians spoke about. What many people don't understand is stories such as the Epic of Gilgamesh were everywhere. It wasn't just in Mesopotamia. You read about Gilgamesh all the way in the Hittite lands. We found fragments of Gilgamesh at Megiddo, right? We find Gilgamesh everywhere. We even find references of Gilgamesh hundreds and hundreds of years later, after the biblical texts were written, at Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Giants. That's right. So the Gilgamesh was actually a Nephilim in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you see how they actually had, this heroic age, but we don't have any heroic stories. And I actually have proposed in the past that there is likely a now lost book of heroes that has just not survived time, that I think the Nephilim were a part of. And it's something that I can deeply get into another conversation. It does.
I think it sounds like an alien invasion. I'm telling you, it's Independence Day. Petros, perfect show, my friend. This is just excellent. Just a wonderful conversation. And where can everybody go and follow everything that you're working on?
Let's see. So I have a podcast / Substack called Digging Up the Past. So if you go to diggingupthepast.net, you will find a lot of my content there. There's also petroskoutoupis.com, which is my personal site, but I don't really update it as much as I should. I'm just lazy. But the Substack gets a lot of updates, so you can just check that out. I'm also on Twitter and all right, I don't know, some of the others.
Well, we've got everything. We've got the links below, diggingupthepast.net. That is below. Of course, Petros' personal site, that is also below. We have it on our website. We have it throughout social media. Petros.
And I'm also on Ancient Origins. So you'll find my content on Ancient Origins.
Yeah, perfect. And so let's come back and let's do a Night of the Nephilim and alien invasion.
That's great.
Alien invasion in the Old Testament. I'll talk. Thank you, Petros. Perfect night, man. Thank you so much. This is Fade to Black. Yeah, thank you, Petros. Petros's links are below, again, over on our website and throughout social media. What a great night on the show. I want to thank Petros. And I want to remind everybody that tomorrow night, right here, James Fox is back with us. His new film, The Program, is doing its world premiere in about, 5 days on the 16th. He's with us tomorrow night. For now, all I've got is Go Back-Lee Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Back-Lee Tappy.